Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's the greatest joy to be with you and with Reza. Our friendship is very new. We met in Central Asia this year, and well, we both attended the same conference, and I heard his paper, and it was an easy choice to invite him because his paper was brilliant. And then I had the occasion to talk to him twice after the paper, and yes, I'm most impressed by him as a person and his scholarship and knowledge. And yeah, I don't even know which part of the Majlis I'm more excited about, but that's actually often the case. So I'm very curious to learn about you, Reza, and your personal story, and then we get to well, actually we stay in Khorasan, or we get back to Khorasan and to Balkh, and then to Balkh. So that's the plan for today. I just want to mention that Reza is currently a postdoctoral fellow in Princeton. So he's at a good place, and then I hope that he will continue his research in academia, jobs provided. So let's start.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really would like to thank you for inviting me to this platform. Very prestigious, very good, very friendly, and to share some part of basically my story. I mean, how I came to academics, because this is when I learned about the platform, and also the way it works. So, and also say why I'm working on specific topics like Khorasan and North India, and in a connected way as well. And then I really would like to hear your feedback about the work, about I mean, how you see basically this topic as well, because it's getting more and more serious basically when I look at it, I mean, further. So, but perhaps before I start showing the say the slides, because we are historians, so we move based on evidences, mostly primary sources and so on. So I thought that my early life history is itself like a kind of narrative we read in historical books. So we need evidences basically to show how was it, or where was I, I mean, how I actually arrived to this stage. And before I basically start saying it, because this say the journey, my journey to academic, is a kind of traditional and non-traditional. So it's a little bit, perhaps looks like a little bit different. But then many people were there, to help me, to basically give me good advices, show me the way that I eventually arrived to this position that I am now. So those people who can see me now, or who will basically hear me later and see this, I mean, say, listen to this conversation, I really would like to thank them. So any one of them who can see this, any one of them who knew me, like when I was much younger, I mean, basically not having access even to education, but now they see me here. So this is basically the hard work of so many people. I mean, and not only me, but so many people who helped me. So I really would like to thank them from the bottom of my heart. So as I said, being a historian, we need all this, like evidences. So I would like to, if I can share my screen here. Can you please tell me you can see it? Can you see it? Okay, great. So I actually call it, a journey from Khorasan to Khorasan, and that the little kid, is on the tree. So it's like all of us basically had a kind of, childhood stories. I was very much interested in mulberry, all the time going on the top of, mulberry trees, and then having them, and then thinking about them, and also seeing the historical monuments around them, and then think a lot, I mean, what they actually are and what they mean from a very early age. So if I, this is like, oh yeah, this one. So I was basically born in Balkh, in a place in northern part of today's Afghanistan. And let me put this here. Yeah. So here is Balkh in today's northern part of Afghanistan. So it's part of basically the entity of nation state of Afghanistan. But as you know, it's part of the historical Khorasan, which is also very important, on the, basically it's very important for understanding the culture and the history of region. So I was born there. My early life all happened there. all those, good times on the mulberry trees and looking at the monuments all happened there. And then I also had the chance to basically think about that area later. And later I realized that how this region was so interconnected historically. If you call it, the Silk Roads, the Persianate world, Eastern Islamicate world, or whatever we name them, or today's Central Asia, basically, it's just one part of it. It was very interconnected historically, and then perhaps because of that, the spirit was already there. So it formed my early life as well, and then the journey to academy that I eventually started looking at this region properly. So as a kid, when I was in Afghanistan at Balkh, so I had the chance to have a kind of traditional education. We call it the Maktab Khana. And then over there, when I basically was a kid, my father had a friend who could teach us at home, and then I had basically the benefit of learning, the Quran, a little bit of Arabic, say literature, poetries, and also, the Shahnama as quite, say common there, and also Gulistan of Saadi and Khamsa of Nizami. So these were like the books basically I grew up with, and then knowing more and more about their stories, I always enjoyed. And these are basically the books you can say created the foundation of my understanding of that region, ourselves, myself, and also the history around. So this, like you can say, the kind of Arabic and Persian literature. And I also learned calligraphy, writing basically in Kufi, in Naskh, in Suls, and Nastaliq, and these are quite, helpful later when I started looking at the documentary sources. So, I'm really thankful to that kind of education I had at say at that early age. And then, like the formal education, which actually was a different, say, whole arena. And then, in Balkh, where I grew up, there were so many historical monuments around, and then as most of them, like basically surrounded by these mulberry trees, so I could go around, and they have them. So one of them was this one, Haji Piyada, we call it. This is the earliest mosque basically in Central Asia. Survived in its original form. So this is basically say from the late 8th century. And then we can talk about it later if you want. So, and then this is the paisley, you can see it everywhere. So basically it's like a very early evidence here, the paisley, kind of, design. And then this is basically a 17th century monument, and this is a Seljuk minaret. So there's like lots of historical monuments were around, mostly built with the bricks, and then beautiful, say artwork on them in terms of tiles or say inscriptions or geometrical, designs that you could see them later in Central Asia and Iran and North India as well. So then, not only that, but there were lots of, other, say, kind of monuments, mosques, madrasas, and also, the pre-Islamic, you can say, monuments around. Like, for example, this is a part of, decoration of a pillar, coming from the Kushan period. So you can see the Buddha, and then, the Vajra is, in the hand of the and another character, or you can see another character. Basically, you can see all this decoration part of the Buddhist, say most probably a temple. So they were around, me when I would see. And also the most, the jewel basically of Balkh was is the shrine of Ali in Mazar-e Sharif. That's why it's called Mazar-e Sharif, or the Holy Shrine. So it's a Timurid basically monument, and then added later by the Shaybanids, by the Afghans, whoever were there. It's like really a kind of a monument of text. So there are lots of text in different let's say styles written. So these were all around me when I was a child, going around and seeing. So these created lots of questions basically in me, that why all these monuments are standing, different shapes, different like say architectural styles, and then different, say, inscriptions, and they are in Arabic and Persian, and then they say a lot of things to us. And then, I was very curious, basically, like growing up, like started looking really, at these things. So going around, seeing archaeological sites, looking at different, people, going with different groups of people, even with like we have Turkmens basically over there. They're still having a kind of, taking camels going up. So I used to walk with them, work with them, going around. And then I realized that not only these historical, like Islamic monuments are around, but there are lots of, like this is a fire altar from the Achaemenid period in Balkh. Like this one is basically from the Kushan, most probably even early, like from the Greco-Bactrian period. And then this is a Sasanian relief, a Buddha, like Ganesha. So it's like question came more and more into my mind, that why all these diversities are basically there around us. And then the forts, around us called, Qal'a, Hinduan, Hindu place, or, Jewish place, the Christians, all these things were there around. So many questions. Till, I mean, what happened is basically the war comes, the civil war. The first is the, invasion of the Soviet armies, then followed by the civil war, losing the house, was basically, no way, I mean, to continue. So I went to Iran. So that was also a historical, path that usually people go to Iran or to India. So I went to Iran, became basically a migrant there, working as a laborer, basically a wage laborer, I mean, person to survive, and doing lots of, I mean, works there. So, but then in Iran, I realized that there are lots of similarities like us. There are so many historical, basically, monuments around, pre-Islamic, Islamic, different religions. And then I realized that basically is a very deep history there. And then I had the chance to talk to people, knowing people, learning about their education system, about the society, accents, they have. And then they're basically a little bit worldview, if you want to talk. So, I mean, this is basically relief of Ardashir, receiving the kingship from, say, from Ahura Mazda here, like mirroring basically the god. So, I mean, and going around in Iran when I was a kid, and here's, as I say, like evidences are needed, as a historian. So when going around, Persepolis, seeing the Chartaq, going to Mashhad in Imam Reza. So it's basically kind of pre-Islamic, Islamic, Arabic, Persian, everything is like kind of, I mean, mixed there in Iran. And these were all, like a kind of questions for me, that how basically Iran, Islamicized, or how all these monuments come around together, how they existed, or coexisted, I mean, in this region. So many questions basically. But then, I mean, this is, for example, the Sultaniyas, like Urjaitu's tomb, I mean, it's a Mongol Ilkhan in Iran. So it's like basically looking at the, the Zoroastrian, Islamic, it's like Mongol all coming together, asking lots of questions, I mean, from people. But then I realized in Iran that, there is a kind of interest in pre-Islamic, say, part, particularly the Achaemenid Sasanian, not much interest in the Islamic part. And there's a kind of difficulty to bring the Islamic and, like, no, I mean, or like pre-Islamic, period together to understand it. And also I realized that, Iran is a kind of civilization, but then in Iran, they try to basically come, reframe it within a national boundaries, without, I mean, really having a connected history. So this was a kind of, problem, and remind me of Afghanistan, because we were not, or the school or in the formal education, they were not interested to tell us, I mean, Afghanistan was basically, I mean, is in the historical Khorasan, what were there before. So they would tell us everything about the Afghan, started with Ahmad Shah Durrani, it's like basically 1545 and all these things. So, but then the reality was completely different. And in Iran, I saw the same, kind of things. And then, my education basically did not go to the higher education, because there was lots of problem. I was a migrant in Iran, and all those things, that a migrant basically go through. And then also realized that, they can't change history, so they have to, I mean, go it. So I cannot change it, they cannot change it. So just interpretations are different. So what happened is I decided to go back to Afghanistan. So I went back, and seeing, the coming of the international forces, a new government, new system, and new worldview basically entering the country. And then people are getting, familiar with the systems in Europe and America. And then, that was the time I worked hard at home. But then I really could not go to Balkh University and others, because it was different. When I entered Balkh University, it's like, it's quite interesting. I saw there was a guy with a long beard with a stick, started beating the students. And the moment I saw it, I thought, okay, this is not my place. This cannot be an intellectual place. So then what happened in 2009, I decided to go to Delhi, to India. So it's again, kind of historical route from Central Asia. People go usually to India. And I went to India. That was a quite, say, kind of a quite, say, journey, because I found myself over there. And then I studied there. I got, my education there. But then when I was there, I tried, not to just be or limit myself to the library and the classroom, but also to travel, really go around. So traveling extensively in India, I mean, usually going to see different monuments over there, different groups of people, try to talk to them, eat their food, dress like them, to really understand what they do. And then in this journey, I realized that basically India is really diverse. I mean, in terms of, I mean, say society, cultural arts are, very diverse. And I really realized that there's a huge, like a strong Indo-Persian, Islamic, kind of cultural heritage around. Everywhere you go is around. And then, so what I tried to do is like tried to study and, you know, I mean, discover for myself, to see, you know, what is there, to observe what is there. And then I had a chance basically to see what kind of religious, you know, or if you want to put it, cultural traditions are there. So I went to see the Dalai Lama, talk to him. I was his student for some time. And then usually go to the Zoroastrian community, you know, I mean, seeing the Parsi, I mean, you know, I mean, these leaders, including Dastur Kotwal sitting here, and then Dastur, you know, Kai Khosrow and all these people, you know, talking to them about, you know, Balkh, and then telling them that, look, there is another part of the Zoroastrian story there in that region. And also with the Dalai Lama, the same thing. I would say that, look, there is a kind of a history of Tibet, you know, reflected in Perso-Arabic, Persian and Arabic sources. So why not, you know, I mean, looking at these things, why just do you are interested in Herodotus and then the Greek things, or, you know, I mean, the Chinese sources, those are important. These are also helpful, can tell you something. And then I would look, you know, a lot on the primary sources, going to the library, another library, you know, archives, seeing the primary sources to understand, you know, the history through that kind of, you know, I mean, primary sources. And then, you know, I mean, around there, when I was going around, you know, seeing the historical monuments, there's a kind of, you know, questions would come more and more and more. So, for example, you know, this one is the entrance to the Masjid Quwwat al-Islam in Delhi, and Qutb Minar. So it's like a part of the UNESCO World Heritage sites now. And then if you know, immediately when you would read this, it's like, I mean, see As-Sultan al-Mu'azzam here, the word, Mu'izzuddin al-Dunya, Mu'izz al-Dunya wa Din Muhammad ibn Sam, Nasir Amir al-Mu'minin. So basically on a mosque built with the remains of the Hindu, say, temple, materials from there, you could see, you know, the word of Sultan and Nasir Amir al-Mu'minin. Amir al-Mu'minin is basically in Iraq. So like I was thinking it was like India, Iraq, Nasir Amir al-Mu'minin, and this guy is basically, is later through the coins, I realized that this Muhammad ibn Sam is the same person who's basically on the Minaret of Jam. His name is on the Minaret of Jam in central Afghanistan, in the mountainous region, but then also in Delhi and, you know, everywhere. So how could this work? So, I mean, this was a like really tough question for me to understand this. And also, you know, I mean, I would remember that in Kabul, you have a mosque built with marble, white marble, you know, with the inscription of Shah Jahan. And then this is a coin of Shah Jahan minted in Kabul. So you could see, you know, there's, while these people go to Delhi, you know, from India also go to, you know, central part in Afghanistan, the heart of, you know, basically that region. So there's a kind of, you know, going, coming, you know, I mean, back. And then, so more and more question, you know, came to my mind. You know, I realized that, you know, while there are all these things are existed, like in clothes, in language, Urdu, you know, in poetries, in Bollywood, in biryani, in all these historical sites, then why don't they teach us Central Asia? Why they don't teach us Iran? Why they don't study Islam? So then why all these things, you know, I mean, around? And then when I was in my basically MPhil, then I discovered something which was a revolution basically in me. And that was the, you know, I mean, knowing about Akbar, you know, I mean, I knew before, but then I didn't know that he commissioned the world history basically in Persian called the Tarikh-i-Alfi, or history of 1,000 years basically. And then reading through this, I read it like, it's basically 6,000 pages in print, read it 3 times, I mean, word by word almost. So it's like, really realize that there is an interconnected history there. There is a long, you know, durée perspective that the Mughals had already there. So it's like, I mean, when we look at long durée perspective in an academic things, it looks like new, but then those people also had a kind of, you know, I mean, vision. Look at Central Asia, look at Iran, look at Islam, to understand, you know, how to learn from history. So basically, I mean, when I read this book, when I see it, I realized that Khorasan is the one, or is the place connecting, you know, this region. And Khorasan, as we all know, you know, is like a historical region, and it's now basically divided between, say, nation states, Afghanistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. And, you know, it's like basically it's there. And then I also, reading all this, realized that, you know, when the, you know, brought me more closer to the Arab, basically to the Arab conquest, to Islam. And I realized that with the Arab conquest, the centrality changes from south of Iran. It actually shifts, goes to the northeast, and remains there almost to the Safavid period. So with the Safavid period, you know, that centrality comes back to Iran, if you want to call it. So it's around, you know, I mean, 800-900 years. So this is also, you know, what Thomas Barfield argues in his basically book.
Reza,
so, you know, yes.
Reza, just a second. Is your image is frozen on my computer? Is it frozen on everyone else's computer as well?
Everyone.
Oh, really? Sorry. So how can we do this then? So shall I?
I don't know. Maybe if
turn it off and then turn it on.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Share it again. So those pictures, so you couldn't see them then, any one of them, right?
No,
So,
no, we could see the pictures, but then your image was frozen, your
oh, my
camera.
image. Okay. So now, can you
Now we can see you.
can you see my hand if I'm waving it?
No, I can't see you at all now.
And oh, so I don't know what happened basically here. So it's like a, so perhaps video. So now, can you
Yeah,
see?
now it
Okay.
is working, and let's relaunch the
I'm sorry
yeah.
about that. I'll go back to this then quickly, very quickly. So can you
And
see?
that's also useful because now, well, I was also frozen by the fact that your image was frozen, but I
Right.
think we are going very, very fast now. So can we slow down a bit?
Sure. So can you see this one? Have you seen this one?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. We saw even, yeah, we were here. That's
Right.
what we last saw. Yeah.
So what happened basically in India, I realized, that, we are basically studied or getting education kind of regional studies, I mean, Central Asia, South Asia, Iranian studies, this kind of, if you want to call it, like division basically. But I realized that Khorasan, which is actually the connecting area between this and the heart of the Persianate world, is missing, is not there. So, and then when I, delved into more and more, say, primary sources, I realized how this region so important, but then why we couldn't hear more about it, right? So it's like basically look at it today's Afghanistan or Uzbekistan or all these things. It's like basically in a way melted away with this nation states, stories mostly. So I become basically more and more interested in Khorasan and more interested in the intellectual, say, I mean, networks around the history of it, I mean, how it connects these regions, how it impacts, you can say, those regions like, I mean, today's Iran or say, I mean, India or even, I mean, North China and those areas. So it's like basically, in a way, I found it like a revolution was to me that I needed a kind of longue durée history, a connected history, going back to the primary sources, and then to bring out this type of basically work. And then there were many people who actually helped me on this, say, journey. And then, so what happened? I was doing my MPhil and working on the millennial basically work. Nobody was interested in Delhi. So, because I was talking about somewhere which is not on the map of, say, these disciplines, these divisions. I mean, basically here, right? So it's not anywhere between, in South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia. So it's nowhere. And then, so what happened? I met Professor Jos Homens there in Delhi, and he basically invited and said, "Reza, come to Leiden." So I went to Leiden. And then in Leiden, I got a new, type of education, really very helpful, learning, about the methodologies, work in Europe, working on, say, also Dutch history to see it, I mean, how they see. And then it was a kind of opportunity to get closer to what I really wanted in Leiden. And then over there, I worked on the history of Timur in Dutch discourse. I realized that the Europeans in that time, 16th century, they really were interested in Central Asia today, in Khorasan and those. And then the best evidence is Nicholas Whitson's North and Ust Taqtaqaya, basically, talking about all these sources. So I worked, I wrote a thesis on that. And then for my MA, I got a chance to go back to India, like to really looking at millenarianism and those. And then I realized that no, I have to get to the history of Islam, go back to, history of Islam, start from the, that region to understand what is happening in India or what is happening in Central Asia. And then I had a chance to join basically an ERC project led by Petra Seibstein here, Professor Petra Seibstein, that many of us know her. And I'm really thankful to her because, she really helped me a lot to understand this field and working in Islamic studies. So then I went through that, and then I worked basically on that, and I chose to work on Bactria. So it's like a kind of step to go towards Khorasan because, starting from Khorasan is difficult. So I realized that I have to go a little bit, earlier to understand how Khorasan was formed. So, and then become Khorasan, and then how it expands to India, which I knew the other, part of the story, basically. So then, because, Khorasan is basically everywhere. Even if you go to Sicily, I mean, under the, basically the monuments you have in Palermo, for example. I mean, Coppola, the Politini, for example. If you see Roger II, you can see exactly he sits and drinking wine exactly like Toghrul, in the Metropolitan of Art. So here in New York. So it's precisely that. So it's like so many things is there. And I realized that, oh my God, it's like how I was so ignorant and blind to see, this part. And then, so then actually it encouraged me, inspired me to work on Bactria, working with different, documents. And that was also a time that I could really focus on documents, the Bactrian, Sogdian, Middle Persian, and Arabic documents from this region, analyze them, look at them, and then see that the documentary, say, sources, they say a different story, that basically we don't get it in the literary stories sometimes, but then they complement, in many, many ways. And then they have their, they really valuable information. So what I did is, so I did another BA over there in Leiden, another MA, and then finally PhD, so to the Arab Conquests. So finally, after a long time, I could get into what I wanted. And then basically I got, like time to really work over there, and I got another MA later in Cambridge. But then, it's like, basically I realized that this is it. So working on Khorasan, looking at Khorasan as a historical place, as a real, areas that really like shaped the history of the whole, that region, basically. There are lots of things going back. Like, during this PhD, all doubts, I had it basically clarified in many, many ways. So it's like, for me, the question was why this region is so complicated, two, so rich intellectually, in terms of, historical monuments everywhere. You can see them. I just showed them some of, them to you, that I'm sure you're very familiar with them. And also, I realized that, look at the Mufassirs of the early Islams, the majority of them are coming from Khorasan. The great poets come from them. These like, these sacred kingship in Iranian, thoughts, say basically in Islamic, it's formed in a way in Khorasan. It's like, like you can see, like, for example, this muhaddis of Islam, you see many of them are from there. And then the way of writing tafsir is also there. So like writing Shastra is also there. So many things, it goes basically take me back to Khorasan in a way. And then, that was, inspiring me more and more, to look, to look at this and then look at the history from a longue durée perspective. So that was a kind of, revolution happened in India. And then in a way, helped me to work in Leiden. And also later when I went to Cambridge, because, that was the time I joined the Silk Roads program. So looking at from Mediterranean to North China, to basically to China, and then Central Asia to India. So then over there, I was basically, my argument or my share was look at the Persianate world. So Iran, Central Asia, India as a connected, like a kind of triangle. So look at this region, because so many things go through this and then enriches. So that's quite important. And then I really would try in that I tried my best to bring out this Persianate, world, and Khorasan at the center of this Persianate world. So that was I was trying, in my best to do. And then of course, Silk Roads in King's College, Cambridge. It's of course it's a global bridge, right? It's a global, a bridge that connects you to many say places and region. So this is what I tried, to do. And then from that time, I really worked, on the documentary sources, literary sources, primary materials I would have, talk about, the importance of the, history of this region within the Silk Roads discourse, the Persianate, discourse, and also, what we learn about, or from these histories to understand Afghanistan. And then I also organized a conference on Afghanistan kings, and later, going around and telling people that, look, Afghanistan as a new things, yes, as Abdurrahman Khan's 19th century. But then this is basically placed in a historical, very old historical things, it's a civilizational thing. So we cannot, sacrifice or victimize a civilization within a security framework, so, or a national framework. So this is what I would try, to basically say, tell more and more, in different parts. So I, from China to say Europe and America, wherever I go, I try to always say about this Persianate world, the Eastern Islamicate world. The Eastern Islamicate is very, very important, because the focus is mostly on the Western part of the Islamicate, say, world. Wherever we go, and you all know about it. So, so basically, these were, there. And then in terms of, scholarship, finally, with all this, here and there. So if I could, situate myself, I realized that, through this long journey, that my interests were very much on this triangle, Iran, Central Asia, and India, in a connected world. If you want to call it the Persianate world or Islamicate East, you can. And then my focus was on Khorasan, the eastern part. And then, and also its relation to North India, because it's very, very deep. And then, and that I really look at the, say, social history. I look a lot at documentary sources to see, the family inheritance, say taxation, religious culture, traditions, intercommunal, interactions. And then, of course, and I look at the political, side of it as well. And that's about mostly I'm interested in the, say, conquest and empire building, because this was I tried to do, and the political structures, local administrations, the backgrounds of the rebellions, in Khorasan and so on. And then when it comes to India, I'm very much and worked and still interested in sacred kingship. So, and also, Indo-Khorasan, if you want to call collection, because that we miss it in Indian education over there, unfortunately. So, and also, as I said, I work a lot with the primary sources, and then my approach is still a longue durée perspective. So I look at that, and that is the base of my understanding of history. And if you look at my publications, they're all the same things, the same line. Social history, mostly coming from the documented sources. Look at this, for example, it's the Bactrian one, from the Sogdian one, Sogdian and Arabic, from the Persian one, and then look at the rebellions, social understanding of, social backgrounds of that as well. So it's mostly focused on Khorasan. And then if you look at the publication, which I publish sometimes alone or with my professor, Yas Homens, we look at kingship in Islam, kingship, in this basically regard, and then mostly about India, and then how India is so deeply connected with Iran and Central Asia. So it's like almost futile to talk about India without, talking about Central Asia and India. It's also misleading, to be honest. So it's like the same for Iran. So if you talk about, Central Asia without, Iran without Central Asia is like really misleading. Or Central Asia without all these things, right? So it's like really difficult sometimes to look at it today, but it's also difficult, to ignore them, right? So we have to work with them. So these are what I do, and this is like a long, say, journey. I try to make it very short, So if you have any question or something, I would love to, take questions, and then we can talk a little bit about the conquest.
So, Reza, thank you very much indeed for this. That's fascinating, and also thank you for making all the doing all this work to produce a presentation with images. No one did it such way as you did so far, and we had many majlises. And thank you for all the work you put into this, and for everyone else in here. It's interesting. We just discussed with Reza, as with other scholars in the past, I had this discussion. It's difficult for us to talk about ourselves. It's not normally what we do. So thank you for doing it so brilliantly. I I have a very journalistic two very journalistic questions before we go ahead. A journalistic in the sense, yeah. In order to encourage also other people who will regard this. So, was it your house? The image of the destroyed house, was it your house?
Yes.
Okay. So just because you just said it with en passant, that's one thing. And could you please tell me about the jobs you did as a migrant in Iran? Just some words. What sort of jobs did you do?
Oh, that's amazing question. Thank you so much for asking it. So first of all, basically my family is like my father, mother, brothers and others. So we lost houses many times. So it's like, once we lost it completely, because when we went there was only a little bit part of, the wall is standing, and then the rest were completely destroyed. And then the other time, like we built it and then we had to leave it. So it's like, but then the saddest part perhaps was on my books, because my father basically had to like to collect lots of books, mostly of tafsir and history, and this kind of books. But then I was interested a lot in novels and Gulistan and like basically Quran al-Sa'dain and this kind of like Amir al-Salan's like love stories, this kind of romantic stories, and of course history. So we had a big library, but then the library losing is like I think it's really affecting. So it's like it affected me to the extent, because losing the books library constantly, that nowadays I see the books, I love them, but I cannot buy them. So I mean, and not only because I don't have money to buy them, because we are all, early career, usually don't have money, but then, it's also the fear to lose it again. So where to, I mean, the Tariq Alfi I showed you, I basically carried it to, 6 countries with me already. So, from one area to another area to another area, and then eventually now in Princeton. And I thought that, okay, so finally there should be a place that I can keep it, right? Not moving it again and again and again, either in the library or somewhere, just keep it. So it's like one issue is that, because the lose of the house is the lose of the nest. So, like displacement going around and around and around all the time. And then the second, in Iran, as you said, I did many different jobs. I was basically working in the agricultural field, like, I mean, collecting tomatoes, working like that, shoveling the ground, helping with irrigation in the middle of night, chased by the dogs. And then in the village, so around, like basically in the central part of Iran, I worked in the basically the factory, making bricks, working with like all time with mud, and then worked, basically clean the windows, I mean, shops in Iran, and then, polish the shoes, worked like that. And then, it's like this kind of the work. But then I realized finally that, I have something in myself, and that is calligraphy, right? I mean, I learned from the childhood. And then, so I really went through that. And then, that was a time it saved me from those kind of jobs, works. And then I started, working as a sign maker in different areas in Iran. And that also allowed me to really travel. So I really traveled around thoroughly. So city by city, because that was the job, I was making the signboards for different shops there, particularly this company called Pump Iran, or the company made water pumps for Iran. And that was a question for me because, I used to go to village, I mean, to make this, to see these pumps, how it works. So that time I was thinking, how much water is there under the ground that all these pumps to bring it up? So probably would be dry one day. But then it allowed me also to really engage, to see Iran. And then the historical ones. For example, like I went and saw a place in Iran that many people, like, I mean, like may not have ever had a chance to see it. And that's a place called Sahl ibn Ali in Kerman, in the desert of Kerman. So Sahl, the son of Ali. So the people believe in it. And then if you go, it's a Seljuk basically period monument, and they don't see it anywhere on the catalogs or, it's like on the books of architecture or whatever. So it's like, I mean, these basically allowed me to see the region, to see Iran, its geography, its people. It's a vast country, basically. I saw how diverse it is. And then, it's like basically doing all those kind of jobs. So different, jobs just to survive.
So, three things. One, I want to thank your parents for you. Please transmit that to them, because it is surely their love and the community around you which gave you the force to overcome all the difficulties and use all the difficulties as part of your studies, even if you didn't know at that point. And you, yes, you have a very good training in social studies, given that you have been nearly in every section of society and worked there. To put it in an ironic way, something which I'm actually quite moved about. So that's one thing. Yes, the other, actually, you wanted to say about hope, and eventually you didn't. So maybe you can come back to this, and then we go to the second part. And just one more thing before we go there from me is what is very important for me in all what you do. So we talk about decolonization, and it is indeed very important. And within decolonization, there is the decolonization of Islamic studies from being simply Arabic studies, and giving more and more importance to other regions. That's a very important fact. And then well, it's my interest is in the not just decolonization, but also decompartmentalization, which is an academic disease we suffer from, and you are really brave to tackle it, and I'm very happy that you have been successful in this. It's extremely difficult, and also the denationalization of history and denationalization and re-civilization of history. What you are doing, that's incredibly interesting and important, and thank you for it. Well, if you want to advise to give the advice of a wise old man on hope to younger ones, please do, and then let's go ahead to the conquest. And sorry for taking up so much time. We can go over time if you have time with it.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So, I mean, I think Nidal, I saw the hand was up. If you want to, like, I saw the hand was up. If she wants or he wants to say something before. Otherwise, that's true.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's really fascinating. And just like I wanted to say, like I grew up I am Palestinian, but I grew up in Syria, and also when I went back in February after the fall of the regime in Syria, I saw our house just completely burned to the ground. And I just wanted to share with you this about the books, because the only thing I found and on the top of the rubble was a dog just sitting on the top of a pile of rubble, and a burned book that I bought before the war in Syria. And like after 13 years, I just went back and found that book. I just wanted to share this with you because like this is very like really emotional moment. I'm sure about like how you feel about it when you go back and visit the nest, as you said, especially the books side of it. I mean, like it's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing this.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Nidal. I really, reminds me of the very famous poem in Arabic, but just like say it quickly. It says that nothing is more difficult for a scholar, A, to leave the house, 2, to leave the library in the house. So I'm sure, many of you, remember that, you know that. And, but as you go back to Stephen, what you said about, hope is basically, all this, hardship I went through from childhood, later, migration, going back here, there, having no place to study, in Afghanistan, being discriminated because what I was, where we come from. And basically, there's a kind of systematic discrimination is there in Afghanistan, by the way, by the government against, people like me, basically. I mean, from my background. But anyway, this is 150 years almost going on. And so basically, I did not lose hope, partially because I used to read those books. And one of the books I loved it was Faraj Ba'da Shidda. So it's like such a lovely book story. And also, these basically the books of Nizamuddin Tusi, for example, Siyasat Nama, Nasihat al-Mulk, all these books, and then Gulistan, particularly like Gulistan of Sadi. So I used to read, they always would tell you that, look, this hardship is there. It's part of life, part of, humans' life. So nobody is going without it. There's like, in different, say, levels, but it's always there. And I learned a lot from these stories to be hopeful. So basically, history, in a way, helped me. So, and I'm helping, to history to talk now, say in academic in a way, but it itself helped me. So that is what I'm trying, to say, to give it to the younger generation, that despite all the problems, disappointments, whatever is there, don't lose hope. So work hard, and that actually pays off, somewhere sometimes. So this is what I I saw it in my own lifetime, and I see it now, in work.
Thank you very much. I just cannot not mention this, that if one of you may all know the famous adagio of Albinoni, which is that incredibly beautiful piece of music, but perhaps not everyone knows its story. And the story is that it's actually not composed in its form by Albinoni. It's composed by a scholar who studied Albinoni's work, and his name I can't remember now, which is really a shame, because he composed the piece. And I think the story is something like that. He went to Dresden, Germany, which was bombed to ashes, and completely unnecessarily. And at the end of the war, by the British and the Americans, and well, it was a splendid city itself, and with libraries and so on. And in the libraries were lots of works by Albinoni as well. And then the I think, and I don't, yeah, it's just a recollection of what I read, that he found, this scholar found a piece of paper from a score of Albinoni where the melody, and found there the melody, and then he wrote that beautiful piece of music based on that melody. That's how he narrated it, and that also explains the beauty and the sadness of that magnificent piece. And it is interesting how destruction, well, and sadness can also be an inspiration and to give hope and surmount. Yes, yes. Well, okay. Thank you very much. Let's go to the conquest now.
So now let's talk about serious basically issues like history. And it's like basically this is what I did my PhD on. I mean my dissertation is on it. So the Arab Conquest of Bactria, and also the local politics there that allowed the Arabs to dominate the region. So in the Umayyad period, and you all know that, I mean, we know a lot about the Abbasid basically revolution there, because there are lots of books about that, from Muhammad Shaban to Agha to so many others, they wrote about it. But then when it comes to the Umayyads, like, I mean, I think Andrew Marsham is here, he may agree with me. So it's like, because his book on the Umayyads is really revealing. And, I mean, it's like when it comes to Umayyad period and Khorasan, it looks like a kind of like a black swan, basically. It's like really less information about it, less engagement on that. Although there are some, works it's like, I mean, progressing, which is really hopeful. But then that is like something I thought that I go back, for understanding Khorasan, I had to go back basically a little bit, because it's this longue durée perspective or mentality, a little bit go back to see what it was, how it happened. So that's basically my dissertation, and then it's going to be a book by Edinburgh University Press soon. So that's my first book basically on that, and then a step to bringing out this Khorasan as a kind of, like important region in both Persianate, world, and Islamicate, world, or Islamic history, basically. It is very, very important. So, so I'm going to share a little bit, about that without going too much into the details. But then, and then I would like to hear, what you think about. So first thing first, I mean, as a student, literature review, right? But I'm not going too much to literature review, because, about the conquest, the Arab conquest, that there are many books basically written. And then Bactria, because it's, in northeastern part of, say the Sasanian Empire, in that region. So usually seen as part of the Sasanian Empire. And then there are lots of, books on the Sasanian Empire, and then the Iranian studies. They basically, when you look at the conquest, you see two, say, perspectives. So one is that you really can call it a kind of Sasanian-centric perspective or view, which looks at the centralized, system in the Sasanian Empire, a kind of political entity, very powerful, everything from the center. Ctesiphon is the center. Once it goes on, then the rest goes on. Basically up goes to the hand of the Arabs. And then if you look at these books, and then there are many books, I just put some. I mean, from Christensen, like here almost to Turaj Daryai, which Turaj actually like tried to go, kind of like against that basically argument to some extent in his book. But if you look at it, the main concern of these books, or this Sasanian-centric, is that basically a centralized system is there, a big empire is there from almost Egypt to Sogdiana, but it falls after the falls of the Ctesiphon. So the concern for them is how this happened, why this happened, how this such a great empire fell into the hand of some, groups of Arabs coming from the Hijaz, they basically consider the Arabian Peninsula so quickly, so, in a short time. And then if you look at this paradigm, or this basically, say, discourse, we don't really see Bactria. So it's either as a small, frontier there that, Dariush, the last, king, basically of the Achaemenids went there, and then Yazgir the third went there, they died there. So it's not much there, not much about that. So it's not a really concern about it, but then still revealing a lot about, how, this region was seen. And then there is another basically view, we call it really a kind of Arabic centric, not Arabic centric view. And that is basically, there are lots of books on it, and then usually talk about the conquest as a great achievement. And even in the title of the books, it's like you see the great everywhere. So I just put, 3 here, but then there are many, many, as you see. Shows like, if our own friend, Hugh, shows like Hugh Kennedy, like talks about the Arab conquest, the great Arab conquest, to Donner, and then to so many others, even with Morazi, the book, which actually I had the chance to be in his talk and talk, to him about the primary sources. So they all look at the Arab conquest as a great achievement, which is, historically to some extent. But then, they look at it from an Arabic perspective, a top-down kind of, view. In this, local people doesn't matter that much. Local situation doesn't matter. Geography, logistics, how they go, who are these people, how they interact, is not much, part of the narrative. So the centrality is the Arab commander, Arab, basically Khalifa, centralizing everything, demanding, basically tributes coming to Medina, like kind of, centralized power there, and then managing everything, like sending these people, which is actually a misleading view. But then, it's like, this is like you can see about the conquest. And then even in this, you don't see anything about Bactria. So it's like you see that the Arabs, go there, and then not much, talking about it. It's like, they go and then take all these regions. So then there is another basically view, which basically written by people mostly from this region, or looking at this, region, the Northeast itself, and the regional, kind of view, or you can call it really a kind of regional perspective. So not that Sasanian, say the centric, view, or the Arabic centric view, but then you have another one, and that starts basically by Vladimir Bartol, so the Russian scholar, who actually wrote his PhD later, become a book around 1900, and then translated to English. And then, Gibb, followed him, and then, you can see Shaban, followed him, and then Parvaneh, and then eventually, finally, you can see it in even Robert Howe's, book. So it's a kind of, view that look at the region. So the region as an entity, geography, climate, people, situation, and then how the Arab comes into, this basically discourse. So that's a very different, you can say, view. And I actually take this view. So for my dissertation, I took this view, for my book as well, and then looking at it from this, perspective, that what this region basically was, before that. And then if you, look at it, or, when you look at it as a kind of, useful framework, then it brings us back to this idea of primary sources. So what do we really have? What these primary sources tell us about the region, and how the Arabs comes into this context. So this is basically the question I try to ask, that, not like looking at it from an Arabic, perspective, like a top-down, view, no, but look at it, this is a region, a real region with real people, but then the Arabs come into this. So how the interaction basically happens, and then look at it in a way, from a local perspective, who are these Arabs are coming, to this region, and what they basically do. And then, for the primary sources, we have many different, basically, materials. So we have not only the Arabic materials like At-Tabari, Baladhuri, and, Ibn Asim al-Kufi, and so many others. But then, you have basically Bactrian documents as well. They're really, actual documents coming from this region. You have Arabic, documents, you have coins, you have, archaeological, data, you have, epigraphic, say, the monuments is still standing, around. And then if you put them all together, then we get a very different, story of the conquest that we already have in different, books, which are all mostly, available, we can see. And then, the question is that where these primary sources come from. And then these are basically the region of Bactria. So it's like here, the Amudarya. So you see this is the Hindu Kush, northern part of the Hindu Kush. So basically from the Marv route, or Marv River here, almost to Badakhshan, and then from the Hisar mountain to north of Bamiyan, this is Bactria. It's a huge, basically, area. It's almost at the size of Belarus today. So that, like big, basically, region. So that's such a region, ignored, for, or neglected, basically, in the discourse. While it's very important, and I'll tell you that how important it is for understanding the conquest, and then later understanding of Khorasan as a whole. So these documents basically come from here. mostly, from these regions, come from almost all over. But then the irony is that none of these doctrines come from the northern part, and the Balkh basically here, the Balkh Oasis here itself. But then we do have, historical narrative, or the Arabic narrative, later Persian narrative, Chinese narratives, and observations that can tell us a lot. And then, of course, lots of archaeological excavations happened here because of the Soviet and later, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan teams. And then, of course, international teams. So we know a lot, basically, that what happens. And then if you look at all these, that, these primary sources, they tell us something different. So they tell us that on the eve of the Arab conquest, or like they basically before, the 7th century, before 651, basically, when the Arabs arrived in this region, there were more than 15 principalities in this region, all independent, local, small kingdoms. They had their own, kings, they had their own system, language, cultural traditions. And then they were all powerful in their areas, but not outside of their areas. And then you can see that, the geography of this region, if you look at it properly, is a kind of shatter zone, lots of, valleys, if I go back to this one, you can clearly see lots of, dense mountains, really, basically the river valley, you can see, here's the valleys, you see basically the oasis. And then you can see, the areas very good for the nomadic pastoralists, save life. And then the areas where you can basically herd the camels and keep them. So it's basically all kind of, or like a kind of arid and semi-arid zones, or semi-arid regions are combined together. That's why we call it, the shatter zone. And then this shatter zone, basically, if you look at it, then the population there, all these primary sources, they tell us that there are many different people, different languages, different religions, cultural traditions, understanding, and connections, basically, to China, India, the steppe and the western part of the Iranian regions. And then they tell us that basically this region, Bactria, was historically part of two types of empire. One was, we call it the indigenous empire, or Iranian Shahanshah system, which Thomas Barfield brings out in his book The Shadow Empires. And on another time, or another basically type of it, is the nomadic pastoralist or Khaqanate system. So Bactria basically is in between both this system, and then benefited, or you can say part of this two system. But this two system, what allowed was that a kind of a political structure, that now I call it local political autonomy and overlordship. There was always an overlord and then the local kings. So, and then the overlords would not interfere in the local kings' affairs. And the local kings basically would just pay the tributes and then run their own, administration, and which they had their own, armies. They had problems, but then they would not fight each other, but they would go and look at the overlords. If the overlord was weak, then they would look for an external power to come in. So the history of the Arab conquest must be basically contextualized in this context to be understood properly. And otherwise, that what Ibn Asim al-Kufi tells you, or Baladri, it's impossible to understand, the conquest in a true sense, because the whole Baladri is one paragraph. So it's like the whole basically Khalifa ibn Khayyat is 6 lines, or the whole of Qutayba Dinawaris talk about this region is like 3 lines. So we don't get that much except for Tabari. So it's like when we put this, all this basically primary sources, we get this picture. And then here's Bactria. You can clearly see between different empires. You have the nomadic pastoralist empires, you have the Iranian Shahanshah system, and you have also the Indian one, and Bactria is basically connected to all of them. So that's why we have all those monuments. You can see traditions that I showed you at the beginning. And then so these primary sources, particularly the Bactrian documents and the Chinese narratives, coins, and archaeological sources, we put them together. We realized that there in Bactria there were many local kingdoms. So there were, if I start with this one, like Balkh or Guzgan, Badghis, and they were under different kings. And then these were basically, Badghis was under the powerful Hephthalite, power. Guzgan had their own kings, Guzgan Khuda we call. This one, Gharjistan, had Gharj Shar, or the Shar of Gharj. Rob was another kingdom under the Khar. Karagistan was another kingdom under the Karagbet. Yabgu of Turks were there, in this area, because it's a very good pastoralist area. And then Balkh did not have a king, but it was a Barmak, the Buddhist, basically the leader of the Buddhist Nawbahar, or very famous, Buddhist complex. And then, you have basically Tirmiz under a king, Chaghonian under a king, Khotal under a king. All these kings were there. And then they were basically recognizing the overlordship of the Khaqan of the Turks. and paying them tributes. So then this is also evidence from the basically Chinese observation before and after the conquest. So before the conquest, for example, Xuanzang, I mean, he says that when he went there in 329 and 30, he was in Balkh. So he says that basically there were more than 27 principalities here, and they're all independent. Why? He thinks because there is no a unifier, power, a single unifier power. Is his understanding is basically Chinese system understanding that he compares, and then also the geography. The geography doesn't allow, these people, become part of one single kingdom. And that's basically a very good observation because it's the earliest explanation that what is happening here. To some extent, he's right because the geography is a shatter zone and it doesn't allow such a things. And of course, these people are paying tributes, and then these are evidences in the Bactrian documents particularly. So we have a set of principalities in Bactria when the Arabs coming in. And then I put basically a chart, from here, from the documents, so you can see that Khaqan is standing up there and then sending a Tarkhan and a Tudun, fiscal basically officer and a commander, to get the tributes, but they do not interfere in local affairs of the kings. And that is the structure. And then this is precisely what we see the Arabs do. So the Arabs precisely follow the same system, in this region, because this is the only way to rule, to control a shatter zone. So and then so you have basically different people, and these are different people with different backgrounds. For example, the king of Chaghanian has a safir, or you can say an ambassador who's a Manichaean, Mujak, in the Chinese sources, or the Barmak is a Buddhist, or Guzgan Khuda himself is basically is follower of the old Iranian god, not Zoroastrian but old Iranian gods. So it's like a kind of diversity is there. But then this political model that Barfield called the Swiss cheese is there. So any big power comes to this region, controls only the big oasis cities like Marv, Balkh, and Bukhara, and largely Chach and Farghana, not other areas. So that is basically the system. And the Arabs precisely did the same thing. And then I can show you here. So when the Arabs, basically come to Bactria, the question is that why they came to Bactria, how they came to Bactria. Because this is also the scholarship, the existing scholarship does not talk about it at all. So that why they come, or how they come to Bactria. And I'm very thankful to Parvaneh Pourshariati because she wrote her dissertation and then also later book, explained that why the Arabs come to Bactria. And then, basically what we see here, we see that, there was a Sasanian Khurasan, or later becomes Arab Khurasan, Umayyad Khurasan. And then you have the Bactria here and Sogdiana here under the Khaqans. And then here is under the Sasanian, overlords, Yazgir III. And I usually call overlordship here. And I consciously use this word. So what do we have here, as Parvaneh showed clearly, that you have the Kanarang of Tus. Kanarang means, there's a title for the ruler of Tus. And then you have the Karin family. And you have, in Herat, the Heftalites of Badris is moving up to Marv and also to Kohistan, all these areas. And then you have the Marzban of Marv. So these three powers are there, basically, with the big one overarching, which is the Heftalites. So coming up, and then there's a enmity between these two families, the basically Parthian families, over Nishapur, control of this region, Nishapur, the city, which is the center of Abar Shah, which is very important part of, say, the Sasanian, part of the Kusti Khawarasan. And then what happens is that these two are fighting each other while, the Marzban of Marv benefits from the Heftalites because it's the relative to the Heftalites. It's like family kind of union. And then the Heftalites are expanding. So what happens is the Kanarang of Tus is cornered under the pressure of knowing that there is a Heftalites coming up and all the way to Herat and Kohistan. And these two, the Karin and both the Marzban of Marv, Mahui of Sur, they're connected to the Heftalites. So if the Heftalites come in, then the seal of this, basically the Tus is closed. So it loses. So what the Kanarang of Tus is doing is basically going to the Arabs who are already in Kerman, in Sirjan. Ibn Amr, the cousin of Khalifa Osman is there. And then their priority was to conquer, the south of Iran, the coast of Nimruz, and not Khorasan. So that was not in their idea in that time. So there is no such kind of pre-planned, centralized kind of system in Arab conquest, such an, like those narratives we have it in the Arabic, like top-down view. And then, so what happens is that these, the son of the Kanarang of Tus comes and see the Ibn Amr, make a kind of contract, and then they invite them to Khorasan to help them against the family of Karim. So the Arabs move there, and then they go there to Tus. So basically defeat the enemies of the Tus, the Karim family. They take Nishapur. And then once they establish in Nishapur the center of Abar Shah, then, the local rulers of this area, they all come to the Arabs, to make peace and then to basically do the payment, giving the payment. And then in the Arab narratives, they usually say, oh, this Ibn Umar, imposed, like jizya on them, tax on them. These are all, what this primary, like this basic narrative they want you to believe. But then the reality is completely different from what they tell you. And the reality is that once you take Abar Shah, and in this area, you are basically the overlord in this region. So these local, small in Nassau and, like near Herat and all these areas, they would come to you, automatically and pay you, they basically the tribute. This is what we really get in Tabari and others, And then what happens is because the Haftalites were a threat to this region, so after neutralizing this area, Ibn Amr sent his basically, Ahnaf, Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais, to come to basically neutralize this region. So this is the first time you see the Arabs move to Bactria, comes all the way to Balkh. So only fighting a little bit in Marvarud and Guzgan. But then the local kings help them and then come to Marv and then go around Pikend, most probably to take Pikend, because it's a very rich trade city. And then, but then they can't, so come back. And then they move, back to Iraq. So this is basically the very first stage of the Arab, if you want to call it conquest, but there is no conquest. So it's a kind of reciprocal, relation. They come there, they get what they, commissioned for, and the Arabs go back. Except, a small, contingent of the Arabs remain in Marv and Nishapur. They were hosted by the local kings, basically fed by the local kings. Even their shelters were given them by the local kings. So what kind of conquest is this? If, the local kings pay you to do what they want, and they shelter you, give your food, everything, and then you call it the Arab conquest. There's no Arab conquest, basically. So it's like, this is what we get from, putting all these sources together. And then the main important thing is there is no garrison in this, region at this time. And then we see that, the second stage, what happens is that usually the Arabic sources don't tell you, partially they tell you basically, is that the son of the deceased king, Yazgir's son, Peruz, with the help of the Turks, and the Chinese coming back to claim Khurasan in a way. And then, at the same time, when the claim was like that kind of claiming, things happening, what happens is that the Karim family comes up again. They're almost taking Khurasan back from the Arabs. And that is the time that you hear that Ziyad ibn Abi Sufyan sent 50,000, soldiers with their families, around 200,000-300,000 people to Marv. And they go precisely to Marv because Marv can feed, that kind of population. It's an oasis city. And that's the norm. You control only the oasis city, the oasis area, not the rest of, the mountains and those, like river valleys areas. And then in this stage, what we can see is that there are raidings, in the Western Bactria and, Sogdiana. Why? Because once you establish such a population, you need money. And you need to basically, support the administration you have. And then, so we have a period of this, the fitna, and then the rise of Ibn Khazim de facto. I call it de facto, rules in Khurasan, which actually is like, he is also claiming Khurasan. And then at the same time, you see that Abdul Malik ibn Marwan also claims, this region. So basically you have three claimants, like three forces claiming this region, and you have the coins of, Ibn Khazim. And then also later when eventually Abdul Malik, uses the policy of divide and rule, on this region. So it's like, eventually, the Tamimis aligning with him and then killing, Ibn Khazim. And this is the coin of Umayyah bin Abdullah, basically, is, minting with the name Khurasan in Middle Persian. Means, it's like a claim completed. We got Khurasan for Abdul Malik. And then, this is the time we have. And in Bactria, what we see is, once they claimed Khurasan, then you can see that the Khalifa Abdul Malik sent the Muhallabids to this region, and I call them Muhallabids because in Arabic they call them Al-Muhaliba. So I just anglicized it Al-Muhallabids. So then what happens is that we have a period of the Muhallabid rule, but it's quite interesting also that you usually don't get it in the, narratives. That is, there is a precise policy of the Muhallabids to keep the anti-caliphal forces in Bactria, not to destroy them. And that's a very conscious policy because they know, or they knew, this is according to At-Tabari, that Al-Muhallab ibn Abi Sufra says to his sons Yazid, and Al-Mufazzal, and he says that as long as these anti-caliphal forces are in Khurasan, we are in the job. And the moment they're gone, we remove them, we lose the job. So we go back to Iraq. So please keep them. And then that is quite interesting, like a policy you can see. And then in this, time on the Mohallabids, they actually, come almost to Balkh and then go to Shuman and then to fight in Kish. But then you don't see any kind of, garrison established, except, like a small one in Balkh, which had no local king, no basically forces. So they do it there again. This is an oasis area. So only Marv and Balkh, oasis area. And with the other kings like the Haftalites and king of Shuman and others, what they do, they try to take tributes from them and leave them in their places. So we don't see any systematic conquest and no interfering in the local affairs of the kings. As long as they don't interfere the local kings, the local kings are fine with them. So it's like happy, in a way. So no war in this time. And then this is an evidence of how basically the Mohallabids deal with the people, with the local kings. And this is basically of Guzgan here. So this is the area of Guzgan. And then, so you have Julad Guzgan, or the king of Guzgan here. And then an Arabic, basically, legend is here. Duriba jizyatan bil Juzjan, or struck, for jizya in Juzjan. But then, this jizya does not mean pull tax, taken from the head of people based on religious understanding, the classic understanding of jizya in Islam. But then it's a tribute taken from the king of this region, the kings. And then you can see, basically the countermarks with, this. And these coins you're usually, minted in Marv and then encountered there, or, basically minted in Anbir in Guzgan, or in today's Saripur, northern part of Afghanistan. So you can clearly see, what is going on in this region with the local, kings. And then the actual era of conquest start with Qutayba. So we can't say 7th century, it's basically early, 8th century. And that is the time that the Umayyad policy changes towards the east. So, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf in Iraq, he manages to remove the Mohallabids. He hated them. He doesn't like them because they were loyal to the Caliph. They don't care about, Al-Hajjaj. And then there's a very famous quote that says that these people are Jababara, like people of, like people of might, power. So the Mohallabids, they don't care about Al-Hajjaj. So they care about the Khalifa. And then, so that's why we get from the narratives that they hated the Khalifa, basically the Mohallabids the most, Al-Hajjaj. And then, so then what happens when they remove the Mohallabids? That becomes a time for Qutayba, for basically Al-Hajjaj, and Qutayba is commander to expand to the east, or in the east. And that's the time that you can see there's a systematic and violent conquest happens in Khorasan, in this area, particularly, Bactria and then Sogdiana. For the first time, they destroy the religious places, particularly in the Zoroastrian areas in Sogdiana. Michael Schenker will talk about it later in next week. And then, although not in Bactria, but a lot in Sogdiana. So in Bactria, they don't destroy any religious center, but then in Sogdiana, they do consciously. And then they also interfere in local affairs. More, Michael will talk about it in Sogdiana. But then what they do, which was not the norm, is killing the local kings. And that is quite interesting because this was not the case, before. And with this kind of, violence is happening particularly in Paikand, in Bukhara, in this area, and in Samarkand. So what happens? The Bactrian kings, particularly the Haftalites of Badghis, they backlash. They go against, this policy. And then there is a kind of rebellion, and eventually, Nizak was killed. And then I should say that, Qutayba's success is mostly because the local kings helped him. And then also because there was no Turks, like in the north, in that area to come and fight the Umayyad. So there is a kind of silence, absence of the Turks. That's why, you have all this Umayyad, conquest. And then this is the time you can see the garrisons, happens. So there are lots of, garrisons, were built in Bactria and also in Sogdiana. And then there is also Arab Amil or Arab agent, appointed on there. And there's a kind of demand, locating the Arabs, settling the Arabs in this region. So you can talk about the actual, you can say, conquest happened in this region in this period. And then also is that the area or the beginning of the formation of the Wilayat Khorasan, or province of Khorasan. The Khorasan, we talk about it later, from here, from Qumis, all the way to Farghana, and northern part of Hindu Kush, all the way to Kharaz. So this is, like the Khorasan, we later, talk about it a lot. And then here I put, a chart also from this primary source. What they tell us that all these, local kings used to pay tributes to the Khaqan earlier. So what they do, now they, shift, and then they pay basically tributes to the Arabs. Some of them were removed those people who are not removed, they basically, accept the overlordship of the Arabs. So it's a kind of shift that's happening. So it's like the Arabs do not interfere in local people's life, issues, but then they deal with the local rulers, and that's also very important to understand. And then you can clearly see that all these kings over there, they go towards towards the Umayyads, and then the Barmak of Balkh, and also the king of Chaghanyan or Chaghan Khuda. These are remaining the most loyal people to the Umayyads, and their progenies later, with the Abbasids. So what happens is that we clearly, have it till 716, when the Turkish Turks, the group, of Western Turks, come under the Khaqan Sulu. They, basically create their federation, a huge power. And once they make their state in the steppe, because the steppe doesn't have resources, so you can't survive as, you can't manage a state, a big state in the steppe. So what you need to either go to India, or either go to China, or eastern part of Europe. This is the traditional, way the Shunnu, Kushan, everybody would go. So the Hans, everybody. So you can't basically keep a state in the steppe. These Turkish do the same thing. So what they do, they attack China, and then they also attack Sogdiana. So they claim Sogdiana because Khaqan Sulu is now the Khaqan of the Western Turks. They claim, he claims almost entire, Sogdiana and also Bactria, because they were under the overlordship of the Khaqan. So he is the Khaqan now. And then because, he is claiming, and he has a formidable, nomadic pastoralist armies. So it's like Umayyads were not even comparable to them in many ways in terms of military. So they put a huge pressure on the Arabs. For 20 years, almost, there's a war. And then, and this is the time that you can get the mismanagements of the Arab governors in this region. They can't manage under such a pressure. Most of their policies don't work. Even the jizya, policy of Ashras al-Sulami doesn't work with the Sogdiana or with Sogdians. And then what we see is that these areas, basically under the pressure of the Khaqan, of the Turks, and they defeat the Umayyads, in the Yawm al-Atsh, Yawm al-Shab, the battle of, the day of Third, the day of Valley. They almost, take like 30,000 soldiers, of the Umayyads were killed in this, wars. When we don't see this kind of discussions, we don't talk about it, right? When it talks about the Umayyad history. So it's like basically a large part of the Umayyads, forces were killed in this, the Khurasani, Umayyad Khurasani, say, forces in this region. They were lost. And then this is the time that, you have like a lot of supports from Syria and Iraq, particularly Syria, goes to Khurasan, Syrian forces, money from the Caliph, forces from Iraq. And the reason is that the Iraqi forces in Khurasan, they were not trustable anymore, because they had local interest. And then the Syrians, they did not have that much local interest. They were following Khalifa more. So they come more, and then usually under the Qaisid, or the Qais, say, leadership, and not the Tamim or the Azd. So then what happens is that, you can see there's a pressure on this. Local kings are also under, now you see there's a big one, the Khaqan. Usually they go towards the Khaqan. Some of them, had interest with the Arabs because of the, basically power politics there. So under the pressure, there is a basically kind of pressure on the local kings and also on the Arabs. And then in this situation, we have a great rebellion of Al-Haris ibn Suraj from the Tamim. So there's a great, rebellion. And then because he is rebelling, basically revolting, so for the first time, he brings the local kings of this area, except for Balkh and Chaghanyan, and, local kings of these areas who are remaining. And then, he's basically bringing the Sogdians who are not happy with the Umayyads' policy of tax and other things. And also, he is talking to the Khaqan, right? Later he joins the Khaqan. So the local, the Sogdians, the Bactrians, the Arabs of Tamim and Azd, they all come together under the leadership of Al-Haris. And Al-Haris, wears the black clothes because is also another, a kind of sign to the Eastern people. That's why the Abbasid Caliph, they wore it. They were not interested, like giving that message to the Arabs. Their message, their audience was Eastern people. That's why they wear, this black things. And the whole argument of, Muhammad wearing this, black turban things are happening later. And all those eschatological things we have in Marv that, you can see another article I wrote, and also Etienne de Lavassière, speaks about it. So what we get it, so you get a huge, rebellion. It happens in this region, in Andkhud. So it's in Bactria. You can call it a Bactrian, kind of rebellion against the Umayyads. So almost takes Bactria from the Umayyads Khurasan, remove it, or takes it, back. And then the Turks are coming from the north. So basically, Umayyads loses almost all these areas, except 2-3, say garrisons in Dabusia, and then, in near Kamarja, near Paikan and Bukhara, and then some other areas. So what happens is that we have, for the first time, a rebellion in Bactria by an Arab who, basically collectively put all these non-Muslims and Muslims together. But then the idea is that he should detach Khorasan from the Khalifa's authority, make it independent under the leadership of a shura or assembly, and then partly, he thinks he himself should be part of it. So that means, the kind of, removing it from the Khalifa or the Umayyad, basically, overlordship. And then we have this, great rebellion, and on the coin you can clearly see what he says, basically, Amar Allah bil adli limansur, means God, ordered, for the just one, and the just one here means, Al-Haris himself. So it's like you can clearly see that there are lots of them, and then the Haftalites, all these people join him. They attack Marv, and then they can't take it. So what happens is the like almost Khorasan is lost, from the hand of the Umayyads. What the Umayyads do is the Umayyads, have to go back, put, this policy away of directly, ordering Khorasan, so putting it under the overlordship or the organization of Iraq. And then here you have Asad al-Qasri from Azd, and then they go there to manage it. And Asad is very famous of having a good relation with local rulers. So again, the Umayyads, realize that policy of pushing, like too much, it doesn't work in this region. So we have to go with local rulers, with their priorities as well. We understand them and work with them. And this is what Asad does it successfully. And then because Asad is doing it successfully, the local kings, particularly this area of Guzgan, of this area basically, they all come to him. And then the local areas of local rulers of this area, they all come to him from Herat, and then of course, all these areas. And then what they do, they eventually defeat, the Khaqan and Al-Haris ibn Surayj. And then of course, there are many other reasons behind that. So I'm not going through, that, because the Khaqan was already, weakened because he lost the war with Chinese. So it's not because of the Umayyads, but because of Chinese. And then, so we have, the time that, the Umayyads reconquer this region. And this is the time that the Bactrian local kings eventually submit to the Umayyads. They finally, submit to the Umayyads when? Around, 736. So it's very, very basically late. And then, so we have, this is the time that, the taxation comes, like all things we have later in the narratives or in the, like, say, source, the literature. It happens much later, not that early, stage. So we talk about for example, Nasr al-Sayyar's very famous, tax reforms. But then his tax reforms, like by Khalil Asamina and others, they see it as a phenomenon, what's happening here. But the actuality is that his tax reform is a kind of response to what Al-Haris did, like a kind of tax return there. It's a kind of, rebellion in Bactria, understanding of it, and this is responding, to that. But that's not mentioned in the, say, in these, say, studies mostly. So what we get is you have increase of population of Muslims, Muslim leaving into now moving into the cities from the garrisons, and then Bactria is eventually, submitted to the Umayyad overlordship, and then you have now a kind of clarification what is, happening in this region. And then if you look at it, only as an example that, eventually the Arabs, dominate this region, Umayyad dominates this region, and then the system, say expanded or extended to this region. Just one example is that, by 747, this is precisely when the Umayyads, forces in Marv are very, say weak, and the time that Abu Muslim is coming. So it's like you can clearly see that there was a document from Bactria, and then from Kazakhstan. So sorry, if this is from Rope, here is Rope on the map. So here, and it says that, the Arabs basically come to this region, and then what they do, they put, heavy taxes, and it's called basically Tazigan, Barit, or Gazit. So it's like a kind of, pull tax and basically land tax. So here you can see it, what happens. And this is precisely after what, happens in Marv. And that is basically Nasr al-Sayyar's, tax reforms. So clearly clarified, you can see it. It moves to Balkh and eventually to Rob. So the system, happens, dominate this region. And then another best example is basically another. This is a quittance or a tax receipt. Written for Mir, basically, son of Bob. So you can clearly, if you, you can read it. So basically you can see Haza Kitabun, Omar ibn Marzuq, Amil al-Amir, Jarir ibn, something, and then Amil Madar and such. So it's Bara'atun basically Lemir bin Bek, and then, in that, it's like, I'm not going to read all of it. So basically you can clearly see that, the tax is happening and the word kharaj is happening here. So it's like, this is kharaj sana khamsa wa mi'ah. So it's like, you can clearly see that, that policy happened in Marv much later, eventually, goes to Balkh, and then, in a way takes the whole of Bactria. So this is the time we can truly talk about the Arab domination, in Bactria. So not at the earliest stage. And then there are lots of, issues, as I said, happening on this, in time, and, go together to allow the Umayyads, to basically expand their control on this region. So this is the time we can truly talk about the conquest, Qutayba, and then the domination of the system under Nasr ibn Sayyar, and Asad al-Qasri first, and then Nasr ibn Sayyar. So this is basically what I, try to show it. But there are much more I'm not going through, and I would like to hear if you have any comments, questions, or something. So it's like the story of the conquest, in one sentence, if I say, is very complicated. And then even it gets more complicated once we go to the primary sources. But then that's the only way. So to go to the primary sources, to see what they say about the region first, about the geography, society, climate, people, their interaction, and then put the Arab, conquest within that context and see how that basically deals with it. And eventually, you see, the local kings never go away. So they remain till the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Reza. That's splendid, and it's very interesting. In spite of all the details, you outlined a very, very clear image, and evolution of things. We are over time. I hope you still have time, Reza.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. So before I switch off the recording, and then we go for the questions, and then everyone, please prepare your questions. So I'm just thinking about the next step, and you mentioned the importance of Khorasanian scholars and intellectuals, and well, and then the name Barmak, of course, very early, according to some sources, even Baghdad was designed following the advice of Barmakid. So, and earlier, my Ibn Muqaffad is an example of the same thing. He's from Fars, but so it is a step further, I guess, and it's just listening to you that one step is to replace the previous overlord and pay the same things as before, and then there is a next step, and this is actually very, very interesting, that the Islamic empire managed somehow to integrate these people and integrate the elites, not just as local elites anymore, but they integrated them into the new centers. So like the Barmakid is a good example, but also the Hadith scholars and all the scholars and thinkers who joined this Islamic venture, and then the region becomes really part of the empire, and the empire is also very much formed by these people, not just Khorasanis, but people also from elsewhere who joined in, and that kind of explains this civilizational not unity but continuum, which became stronger than ever after the Islamic conquest. What do you think?
I think that's a very important question, and least I think is studied, in the Islamic studies as a whole. is that, we still look at the Umayyads from a very Western perspective. And by Western perspective, I mean usually Syria perspective, like the palace of the, Khalifa of Umayyads, Khalifas going around, doing all those things, which is fine. But then I guess the good question comes from Thomas Barfield recently. I had a chance, to talk to him, like basically for hours and hours we discuss usually. And he actually opened my eyes to something that I can now explain what's happening, as you exactly asked this question, that how this overlord changes and the local kings become part of the system, right? So, what happens is that the Umayyad Empire, very much like the Steppe Empire, because they come from the Hijaz, right? I mean, the Arabian Peninsula. And the fact is that Arabian Peninsula does not have that much resources, so it cannot survive. If you have a big state, you cannot survive, right? So Muawiyah goes there, build a dam, like you have a Ma'dan, Amir al-Mu'minin, get some, stuff from there. These are all fine. But then you cannot keep an empire, like you cannot manage an empire from the Hijaz. That's the reason when you read, the early like histories, they say all monies come from Iraq, basically, is the time that, for the first time they expand the masjid or the mosque of the Prophet, so they didn't have that much money earlier. So it's like all paying money to the, for example, the Quraysh, based on the Sibqa, Nisba, all those kind of things we have. But then the actual thing is the framework. The framework is that, the Umayyad Empire at the beginning is a shadow empire. So the shadow empire means that like within internally, what happens? There are devices, working based on basically the composition of the society, which is the tribal society you have it there, with the elites, living in Medina and Yasrib or Taif, those areas, traders. So, and of course, very much related to the shrine over there. So this shadow empire, once it started building and the state was established, it cannot survive unless and until it brings resources into it. And that's the reason they move to Syria and to Iraq. So, and then why Iraq? Because it's very resourceful. Why the Sasanians are there? Why the Parthians? Everybody's there, right? So it's like very resourceful area. And then, so the resources come to this region. So basically the Umayyad Empire is a shadow empire. And the shadow empire is not interested in other things except for bringing, the resources into, to basically to keep this state. And then after some time, because this shadow empire from the Hijaz shifts into the Iranian, context, which the Sassanians were, it becomes an indigenous empire. Like basically it takes the form of indigenous empire or the Shahanshah system. So the Shahanshah is on the top, and then all this Shah or the small kings, around, all, independent, they are the allies and friends of the Shahanshah, right? They're not the subject. So, and this form of working together is basically a scheme, and I quote, Barfoot here, if I remember it very well, is basically is a necessary scheme of governance, in this Shahanshah system to bring the incorporate local kings without taking their autonomy, without taking their areas, to bringing them, to make them part of the system, and then to work, because that is basically exactly how the Shahanshah system works. So then the Umayyads, in a way, when they come to this, area, so what they do, they transform into a Shahanshah system. And then, so that is one of the reasons that you can see that they continue. And the best example of this is basically the Abbasids. The Abbasids is the best example of the Shahanshah or the indigenous system, that after this transformation basically happens. And then, so those local kings, that they were prestigious earlier because they had access to the central, imperial system. They had access to the money, access to the politics, like exactly like King of France, for example, under the Pope, or King of England under the Pope, or King of, say, Austria under the Pope. So you have, a prestigious, you can use that prestigious for your local issues, and you can get, access. And then, of course, trade and other things, you can talk about it. So that's one of the issues that, these local kings, basically, they were very aware, particularly in Khorasan, because they were already part of this system. So it's like before even the Arabs come in, they were part of the Sasanian, the Huns, the Haftalites, say the Achaemenids, they were part of the south of it, at least south of Afghanistan, part of Mauryans. They were part of basically Tang Dudufu, part of the Khaqan. So they knew already. And then that is the interesting thing is happening. And then the other issue is that once you're in this region, whatever power comes in, you cannot control this region without the incorporation of the local kings. So you have to allow, and this is the biggest mistake. I always tell to this today, people in Afghanistan, they look for the political model. And I say, what you do is you just ignore the history of this region. So by bringing another model. So this is exactly how it works, for the last two millennia. And then the Arab, or the Umayyads is part of the same story. So that's the necessity of bringing local kings, because that is the scheme of the governance, if I can say, yeah.
Yes, well, I think what is also interesting that they actually bring them to the center, not just as local kings. There is real influence to the new center. Just as a footnote, something what you know very well, but not everyone who will watch this recording would know on the shadow empires and the indigenous empires. To put it very simply, you cannot collect and store livestock. So horses, camels are nomad warriors, very incredibly powerful. But you cannot collect all the horses of the steppe in one region, quite simply because they will eat up the grass. So you have to give them back. So that's why you cannot build an empire on the steppe alone, because what you can actually store is crops. So the indigenous empire is one based on intensive agriculture. And yeah, this is just a footnote. By the way, I loved the fact, and this is something which this kind of symbolizes the beauty of this talk, to talk about Syria as the West. So that we don't hear this in many contexts and many talks. That West. When I'm talking, I'm quoting you now. When I'm talking about the West, I mean Syria. I love that. Okay, now I will stop the recording, but I think many of us will stay here and enjoy the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
You're welcome.